The night my house burned, the air itself felt personal. Smoke clung to my throat like betrayal, and the firelight painted my front yard in the colors of grief: orange, black, and funeral red. Every crack of wood sounded like a memory snapping in half. When the roof collapsed, I swear I heard my husband's voice vanish with it. The firefighters did what they could, but you can't put out 28 years of marriage with a garden hose. They told me to step back, but I couldn't. That home wasn't just lumber and drywall. It was Harold's laughter echoing down the hall, his rose garden perfuming every sunrise. Now all of it was twisting into smoke that would never come back. A detective approached, notebook trembling under the flicker of flame. "Possible arson," he said, voice low. I didn't need the word. I could feel it. There's a difference between fire that starts by accident and fire that feels like a signature. This one had intention, a message written in gasoline. As dawn crept over the smoldering wreckage, the questions began to pile higher than the ash. Who hated me enough to do this? Why now? The media called it tragedy. I called it a declaration of war. They let me collect what little survived: a cracked coffee mug, half a picture frame, my gavel warped by heat. I held it like a relic of the woman I used to be, Judge Miriam Blackwood, upholder of law, protector of order. But as I stared at the ruin of my life, I realized law and order had just been burned to dust. The police promised an investigation. I promised myself something else, that whoever lit that match would learn what justice felt like when it stopped wearing robes and started wearing fire. I didn't know it yet, but the woman who started this blaze wasn't done. In less than a week, she'd walk into my courtroom wearing designer shoes and a smirk, and I would finally see the face of the person who thought she could burn down a judge's home and walk away clean, and that's where this story truly begins. 6 months before my life went up in smoke, I was still learning how to live without Harold. My husband had been gone for only 4 months. Cancer, stage 4, a thief that took him piece by piece until I was left with echoes. Our 1940s craftsman home sat at the edge of Pinewood Estates, a place that used to smell like lilacs and Sunday barbecues. Now it smelled like money. The neighborhood had changed. The old blue-collar families were gone, replaced by shiny SUVs, perfect lawns, and neighbors who measured status by the square footage of their garages. It wasn't a community anymore, it was a competition. And the queen of that competition was Bryn Ashworth Sterling. You know the type, the kind of woman who treats every cul-de-sac like her personal kingdom. 45, surgically preserved, always in designer athleisure that probably cost more than a teacher's salary. HOA president, self-declared guardian of neighborhood standards. Translation: if it brought her joy to ruin someone's week, she'd call it community service. Our first encounter wasn't dramatic. Not yet. I was in the yard, hammering the final post of the privacy fence Harold and I had planned before he died. 6 feet of cedar, simple and strong. He'd wanted it to be our quiet place, a barrier between us and the noise of the world. When Bryn appeared, I was still holding the hammer. "You must be the widow," she said. Not a hint of sympathy in her voice. "Judge Blackwood," I corrected, wiping my hands. Her smile tightened like a bad facelift. "Right, the judge. We have a problem." Out came her weapon of choice, the pink tape measure. She snapped it open with theatrical precision, stretching it across my fence. 6 feet 2 inches, she declared. "Regulations say 6 maximum. You'll need to remove it." I took a breath, steady, deliberate. "Show me the regulation." She blinked, fumbled through her leather binder, and came up empty. Because there was no regulation. My fence was perfectly legal. Her expression darkened, and for a heartbeat, I saw the real Bryn. Not the polished president, but the woman who thrived on control. "We'll see about that, Judge," she said, turning on her heel. That night, over reheated leftovers and Harold's untouched bourbon, I searched her name in the court database. It didn't take long. 3 years earlier, her husband's company, Sterling Premium Builders, had stood before my bench, accused of scamming an elderly veteran for $30,000 in fake roof repairs. I'd ruled against them hard. Bryn must have remembered my face from that day. The next morning, a letter arrived. Then another. Violation notices. Unapproved fencing. Improper landscaping. Each more absurd than the last. She was testing me, seeing how far she could push. I didn't react. Judges don't flinch. We wait, we document. We strike when the record is undeniable. Still, I could feel something dark building beneath her pastel politeness. This wasn't about offense. This was about control and humiliation, and revenge dressed in HOA bylaws. As the sun set behind Pinewood's manicured streets, I watched her silver Tesla glide past my driveway like a shark circling shallow water. And I knew, the next time that woman came for me, it wouldn't be about offense. It would be war. What began as a single fence complaint turned into psychological warfare. Within a week, my mailbox looked like a crime scene. Thick envelopes stamped RIE, Pinewood Estates HOA violation notice, arriving in batches of 3 and 4. Each one was more ridiculous than the last. Violation number 1, non-regulation mailbox color. My black mailbox had been there since the Reagan administration, but apparently now it clashed with the community aesthetic. Violation number 2, unapproved decorative garden feature. She meant Harold's memorial stone, gray granite etched with, "In memory of love that grows eternal." Violation number 3, excessive bird feeding. My husband loved cardinals. I filled one feeder every morning. According to Bryn, it created nuisance conditions. Each envelope came certified mail, costlier than the fines themselves, because intimidation had to look official. The mailman started avoiding eye contact when he handed them over, like he was delivering bad news from the universe. At first, I laughed. A sitting judge harassed by a suburban dictator? Absurd. But by the 5th letter, laughter turned into insomnia. I found myself checking the front yard at midnight, convinced she was out there measuring something. Neighbors began whispering. The Rodriguez family told me Bryn had fined them $800 for a small Virgin Mary statue in their garden. A single mom down the street was cited because her kids drew chalk hopscotch squares on the driveway, defacing shared property. A pattern emerged. Minorities, widows, single parents, retirees. Anyone who didn't fit her picture-perfect brochure. Bryn wasn't enforcing rules. She was purging imperfections. One afternoon, Walt Henderson, the neighborhood elder who'd lived here since the 60s, knocked on my door, pipe smoke curling in the sun. "Judge," he said quietly, "you're not her first target. You're just the first one who might hit back." That sentence stayed with me. That night, I sat in Harold's old office, surrounded by his law books and the faint scent of his aftershave. I pulled every HOA statute in Colorado page by page and began marking violations. Not mine, hers. Every notice she sent lacked legal standing. No official vote, no due process hearing, no documentation of adopted bylaws. She wasn't just cruel, she was sloppy. Then came the moment she crossed from nuisance to criminal. My security cameras, newly installed discreet, caught her striding through my backyard with 2 men carrying clipboards and attitude. One pointed at Harold's roses, another took photos of the fence. They laughed. She laughed louder. When I replayed the footage that evening, something in me hardened. I'd spent 20 years on the bench watching people ruin their lives through arrogance and ignorance. Bryn Ashworth Sterling was about to become my newest case file. I documented everything. Timestamps, license plates, every forged violation. I even printed stills from the video and labeled them like exhibits. A, trespassing. B, fraudulent inspection. Sound intent to harass. But she didn't know I was watching. By week's end, her tone changed. The letters got nastier, more personal. Your property lowers neighborhood morale. Your presence deters buyers. She wanted fear. And I gave her silence, a silence that made her wonder what I was planning. What she didn't know was that the judge she'd decided to torment was building a legal noose out of every paper she mailed, and soon, I wouldn't just survive her harassment. I'd use it to end her. Judges are trained to stay neutral, to weigh evidence, not vengeance. But the day I watched Bryn strut across my yard on camera, I realized something. Neutrality is a luxury the harassed can't afford, so I became what I was trained to be. An investigator armed with patience, precision, and a legal mind sharp enough to cut marble. By day, I presided over courtrooms filled with petty thieves and drunk drivers. By night, I turned Harold's office into a war room. His desk became my command center. The scent of his pipe tobacco still lingered in the wood, like he was reminding me to stay calm, to stay smart. First, I built my foundation. evidence. Everything would be by the book. Dates, times, photos, recordings. I scanned every violation notice, highlighted procedural errors, and matched each false fine with HOA statutes. My printer became an accomplice, spitting out pages of proof until the ink ran dry. Second, I built my strategy. Most victims beg for mercy. I preferred paperwork. I filed formal complaints with the Colorado Real Estate Commission and the State HOA Oversight Board, each supported by full documentation and chain of custody. Then came my favorite part: surveillance. I installed high-resolution cameras across the property, calibrated to capture faces, license plates, and the self-righteous smirk of anyone dumb enough to trespass. Bryn thought she was untouchable. She had no idea she was starring in her own criminal documentary. Days passed, and the footage piled up like court exhibits. Her inspections increased. So did her arrogance. Each time she crossed onto my property, I felt my pulse slow, not rise. Rage had burned off. What remained was cold focus. Then came the jackpot. Thursday morning, 9:43 a.m., while I was sentencing a repeat offender downtown, Bryn arrived again. This time she brought backup, her interior designer and her personal trainer. The cameras caught everything, them staging photos, marking false code violations, even measuring my fence again, as if inches could justify obsession. When I reviewed the footage that night, the sound of their laughter felt surgical, clean, detached, and damning. That was the moment I stopped thinking of her as a bully. Bryn Ashworth Sterling wasn't just cruel. She was criminally stupid. She'd trespassed, falsified records, and conspired to defraud property owners on camera. And she'd done it to a federal judge who understood exactly how to turn malice into a conviction. So I smiled, for the first time in months, and whispered to the empty room, "You just filed evidence against yourself, Bryn. The game had officially changed. Justice is supposed to be blind, but grief gives it perfect sight. For me, that sight came the night I found Gavel missing. Gavel wasn't just a cat. He was Harold's last gift, a scrappy courthouse rescue who spent chemotherapy sessions curled on my husband's lap. When Harold died, Gavel became the heartbeat in a silent house. Every morning he waited by the feeder for the cardinals Harold loved. Every night he slept on the pillow that still smelled faintly of him. So when I came home from court one evening and found the back gate wide open, my stomach dropped. Gavel never wandered. The cameras would later show exactly who left that gate unlatched. Bryn herself, checking the latch twice to make sure it wouldn't close. I searched until sunrise. Voice hoarse from calling his name through every alley and yard. Neighbors joined me, even Walt, cane in one hand, flashlight in the other. But the street stayed silent. 2 days later, the call came. "Judge Blackwood, we think we have your cat." The vet's tone made my hands shake. Gavla was alive but barely. Ribs broken, lungs collapsed, dehydrated and terrified. The injuries matched one thing: being chased by machinery. Security footage filled in the rest. An hour after Bryn's inspection, her landscaping crew arrived with industrial leaf blowers. They cornered him in the yard, her laughter echoing faintly in the background audio as he bolted through the open gate and vanished into the storm drains. That night, sitting beside his oxygen tent, something inside me changed. The part that believed in restraint went dark. Bryn hadn't just violated property lines. She had tried to destroy the last living piece of my husband. When Gavel finally lifted his head and purred weakly against my palm, I whispered, "You held on. Now it's my turn." The next morning, I filed criminal charges: unlawful entry, animal cruelty, conspiracy to harass. I sent copies to the local news station, the district attorney, and the HOA board. She ruled like a queen. Bryn Ashworth Sterling wanted control. What she didn't realize was that by hurting what I loved, she'd just handed a federal judge the moral authority to burn her empire, legally, to the ground. And this time, the flames would be mine. You can't hide evil once sunlight hits it. 3 days after I filed charges, the story broke. Channel 7's Sarah Morgan ran the headline, "Judge versus HOA When Watchdogs Attack." My security footage aired live, Bryn trespassing with her designer posse, the open gate, the blowers, the aftermath. Gavel's tiny bandaged body flashed across the screen, and within hours, the story went viral. The community's silence shattered. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to in months showed up at my porch with casseroles, signed affidavits, and quiet rage. Walt brought a stack of envelopes, copies of letters Bryn had sent over the past year. They told identical stories: fabricated violations, extorted fines, harassment until homeowners sold and moved away. "She's been bleeding us dry," Walt said, voice trembling. "Now she's finally picked the wrong target." The Rodriguez family, the single mom, the elderly Morgans, they all came forward. My yard turned into a legal command post, tables covered in binders, photos, and sworn statements. Every petty fine connected to missing HOA funds. Bryn hadn't just been tormenting residents. She'd been robbing them. I compiled the evidence like I was preparing for trial, because I was. Fraudulent fines, forged documents, misappropriated HOA dues transferred into personal accounts. It was a paper trail of greed masquerading as community service when Sarah Morgan aired part 2 of her exposé. Power, property, and the HOA president from hell. The fallout was nuclear. Phone lines jammed. Donations poured in for legal support. Former residents from other states contacted the station, claiming Bryn had pulled the same tactics before moving to Pinewood. That's when I realized this wasn't just local corruption. It was a pattern. The more we uncovered, the uglier it got. Missing audit records, fake contractors, emergency funds drained for repairs that never happened. Bryn's HOA empire wasn't built on community, it was built on crime. That night, I stood on my porch watching porch lights flicker on one by one across the street. For the first time since Harold's death, Pinewood felt alive again, not with fear, but with purpose. We weren't neighbors anymore. We were witnesses, and together we were going to bring the Queen of Pinewood crashing down, one documented signature at a time. The morning after Sarah Morgan's second broadcast, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, attorneys, even state regulators wanted statements. But one call stopped me cold, a voice calm, seasoned, and quietly dangerous. "Judge Blackwood? My name's Patricia Donnelly, retired FBI. We need to talk about your HOA president." 2 hours later, she arrived on my porch carrying a manila folder thicker than a Bible and a batch of homemade cookies that smelled like cinnamon and secrets. She looked harmless, gray hair, librarian glasses, steady smile. But when she opened that folder, every illusion vanished. "This woman," Pat said, tapping Bryn's picture, "isn't who you think she is." Inside were photographs spanning a decade, different states, different names, the same face. Rebecca Ashworth. Scottsdale. Fanford Beth Sterling. Phoenix. 2018 Sandra McKenzie. Detroit, 2010, same smirk, same obsession with HOA boards, same trail of chaos. She infiltrates neighborhoods, Pat explained. Wins elections. Drains community funds. Files inflated insurance claims. Then, surprise, a mysterious fire wipes everything clean. Collects the payout and moves on. My pulse pounded. How long's she been doing this? Over a decade. At least 4 states. We estimate about $4 million in total fraud. Pinewood's just her latest hunting ground. I stared at the evidence, my mouth dry. So I wasn't her target, Pat nodded. You were her cover. Nobody looks too closely when a federal judge is distracted by neighborhood drama. She needed your outrage to mask her theft. The realization hit like a gavel strike. Bryn hadn't picked me out of spite. She'd picked me out of strategy. Harassing a judge created noise, headlines, a perfect smokescreen while she looted the HOA accounts behind the curtain. Pat spread more documents across my table. Bank transfers, false identities, and tax filings that read like a masterclass in organized crime. "And here's the kicker," she said, eyes glinting. "She filed your neighborhood's insurance policies under falsified valuations. $2.8 million on an $800,000 property. Classic setup for a total loss claim." A chill slid down my spine. "She's planning to burn Pinewood." Pat leaned back, folding her arms. "She's planning to burn you, your rebuilt fence, your garden, your house, all of it. It's how she erases evidence." The room went silent except for the faint hum of my security system. I looked around at Harold's books, his chair, his life, and realized every inch of it was already on her blueprint. But this time, she'd underestimated her victim. I wasn't just a judge. I was now the lead witness in a federal RICO case. Pat smiled faintly. You up for one last fight, Judge? I met her eyes. Oh, I'm just getting started. By the end of that week, my home wasn't just under surveillance, it was wired like a federal operation. Pat Donnelly coordinated everything. Concealed cameras, live feeds, GPS trackers on Bryn's Tesla, even a decoy HOA account monitored by forensic accountants. What had started as a neighborhood feud had become a joint task force with one mission: catch Bryn Ashworth Sterling red-handed. For the first time in months, I slept with purpose. Not peace, purpose. Every movement, every word was part of the trap. Bryn thought she was still in control, parading through Pinewood with her manicured confidence and fake smiles. She had no idea the people she'd terrorized were now documenting her every breath. The morning it happened, the sky felt too calm. A soft haze over the mountains, birds chirping like the world didn't know it was about to witness justice in real time. At 9:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. Pat's coded text. Queen on the move. Minutes later, my security monitor lit up. There she was, Bryn stepping out of her silver Tesla with that same tape measure in hand, flanked by her designer and trainer. Only this time, they weren't staging fake violations. They were planting evidence. I watched as they placed dead vegetation near my electrical panels, poured something dark along the fence line, and took staged photos like professional insurance adjusters. My cameras caught every angle, her commands, her smirk. The exact moment she crossed from fraud into felony. Then, the pièce de résistance. She waved over the fire inspector she'd bribed to assess code violations. But this wasn't the same man she expected. Pat had already alerted the real fire marshal, Jake Morrison, a 30-year arson specialist who played his role perfectly. Afternoon. Ma'am, he greeted, pretending to take notes while his hidden body cam recorded everything. Bryn leaned closer, voice dripping with arrogance. We can handle this quietly, she said, sliding an envelope across his clipboard. Community safety depends on cooperation. Morrison's calm reply would become federal evidence. You just offered a bribe to a public official. You might want to lawyer up, Mrs. Sterling. Her smile faltered for the first time, and for the first time, I knew the trap had snapped shut. What Bryn didn't realize was that every camera, every microphone, and every law she'd twisted had just turned against her. The fire she was planning was already burning, under her own feet. Justice doesn't always come with a gavel. Sometimes it comes with flames. 2 nights after the bribery sting, I wasn't sleeping at home. Pat insisted I stay with Walt, just in case. I'd fought her on it, stubborn as ever. But something in her tone told me she knew more than she could say. At 3:17 a.m., I found out why. The explosion shattered the quiet. A deep, concussive roar rolled through Pinewood, shaking the windows of Walt's guest room. I ran outside barefoot, heart pounding, and there it was, my home, Harold's home, engulfed in orange inferno. The night sky glowed like daylight, smoke curling into heaven as if my husband's spirit was finally being forced to leave. Fire trucks screamed down the street, their lights cutting through chaos. Neighbors poured out of their houses, half-dressed, shouting, crying. Walt held me back as I tried to run toward the flames. You can't go in there, Miriam. It's gone. Gone. The word rang hollow. But even through the grief, something else surged beneath the shock, certainty. Bryn had done it. By sunrise, the fire marshal's team had found everything. Accelerant trails, tampered gas lines, propane tanks hidden behind my hedges. But the most damning evidence wasn't physical. It was digital. My fireproof security drives had survived the blast, capturing every second leading up to the explosion, including Bryn's husband sneaking into my yard at 3:10 a.m. And the cherry on top? Insurance investigator Jennifer Park uncovered that Bryn had filed her damage claim at 2:30 a.m., 40 to 47 minutes before the first flames. Premeditation in writing. The story hit national news before the embers cooled. HOA president suspected in attempted murder of federal judge. Pinewood turned into a media circus overnight. Reporters camped outside the ruins. Neighbors waved signs reading, "Justice for Judge Blackwood" and "Justice for Gavel." Bryn still thought she could talk her way out of it. She even showed up at the fire scene, crocodile tears and full makeup, telling cameras I'd ignored safety regulations. But what she didn't realize was that every word she spoke was being recorded by federal agents already preparing her arrest warrant. By noon, her smiling face was replaced with a mugshot. And by sunset, the woman who'd tried to destroy me learned what real destruction felt like, the kind only justice can deliver. 7 days after my house turned to ash, Bryn Ashworth Sterling walked into my courtroom, in handcuffs. Gone was the manicured perfection, the yoga outfits, the smug confidence. What stood before me was a woman stripped of everything except arrogance. Her orange jumpsuit clashed beautifully with her spray tan, and for once she couldn't measure her way out of it. The courtroom buzzed like a hive. Every seat filled. Reporters packed the back rows, microphones ready. Former neighbors, victims really, stood along the walls. The Rodriguez family, the Johnsons. Walt, sitting front row, arms crossed like a sentry, and me? I wasn't presiding, I'd recused myself, of course. Another judge, Patricia Morrison, took the bench. But I sat beside the prosecutors, every document, every photo, every timestamp ready to speak for me. The charges filled the room. Attempted murder of a federal judge, first-degree arson, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, civil rights violations, and my personal favorite, RICO, each count stacked like bricks, building the prison that would hold her for life. Bryn's public defender stood, face pale, trying to argue for bail. He barely got 2 sentences in before the federal prosecutor, Amanda Stevens, rose with the confidence of a woman holding checkmate. "Your Honor," she said, "the defendant is a serial offender under multiple false identities, responsible for over $4 million in fraud and 15 destroyed communities. She attempted to murder a sitting federal judge by burning down her home, then filed an insurance claim before the fire started. We consider her not just a flight risk, but a domestic terrorist." Gasps rippled through the room. Even the reporters froze. Then Bryn did the one thing I'd been waiting for. She stood. "This is a witch hunt," she shouted, voice cracking. "Judge Blackwood used her position to destroy me. She's the real abuser of power," the gallery murmured. Flashbulbs exploded. I leaned back, calm as stone. Judge Morrison adjusted her glasses and said, "Mrs. Sterling, you stand accused of attempting to murder a federal judge, defrauding your community, and orchestrating organized crime across 4 states. The evidence is overwhelming. The only witchcraft here is the illusion you thought you could get away with this." The gavel struck once. Bail denied. Defendant remanded to federal custody. Applause erupted, not the polite kind, the cathartic kind. The kind that shakes walls and lifts the weight of 100 bullied neighbors. As marshals led Bryn away, she turned to me with venom. "You'll never prove I meant to kill you," she hissed. I met her eyes. "You just did." For a moment, the room went silent, like justice itself was listening. Then the cameras flashed again, and the woman who'd built her empire on intimidation disappeared behind a wall of federal agents and iron doors. The war was over. And for the first time in months, I could finally breathe. 7 days after my house turned to ash, Bryn Ashworth Sterling walked into my courtroom, in handcuffs. Gone was the manicured perfection, the yoga outfits, the smug confidence. What stood before me was a woman stripped of everything except arrogance. Her orange jumpsuit clashed beautifully with her spray tan, and for once she couldn't measure her way out of it. The courtroom buzzed like a hive. Every seat filled. Reporters packed the back rows, microphones ready. Former neighbors, victims really, stood along the walls. The Rodriguez family, the Johnsons. Walt, sitting front row, arms crossed like a sentry, and me? I wasn't presiding, I'd recused myself, of course. Another judge, Patricia Morrison, took the bench. But I sat beside the prosecutors, every document, every photo, every timestamp ready to speak for me. The charges filled the room. Attempted murder of a federal judge, first-degree arson, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, civil rights violations, and my personal favorite, RICO, each count stacked like bricks, building the prison that would hold her for life. Bryn's public defender stood, face pale, trying to argue for bail. He barely got 2 sentences in before the federal prosecutor, Amanda Stevens, rose with the confidence of a woman holding checkmate. "Your Honor," she said, The defendant is a serial offender under multiple false identities, responsible for over $4 million in fraud and 15 destroyed communities. She attempted to murder a sitting federal judge by burning down her home, then filed an insurance claim before the fire started. We consider her not just a flight risk, but a domestic terrorist. Gasps rippled through the room. Even the reporters froze. Then Bryn did the one thing I'd been waiting for. She stood. "This is a witch hunt," she shouted, voice cracking. "Judge Blackwood used her position to destroy me. She's the real abuser of power," the gallery murmured. Flashbulbs exploded. I leaned back, calm as stone. Judge Morrison adjusted her glasses and said, "Mrs. Sterling, you stand accused of attempting to murder a federal judge, defrauding your community, and orchestrating organized crime across 4 states. The evidence is overwhelming. The only witchcraft here is the illusion you thought you could get away with this." The gavel struck once. Bail denied. Defendant remanded to federal custody. Applause erupted, not the polite kind, the cathartic kind. The kind that shakes walls and lifts the weight of 100 bullied neighbors. As marshals led Bryn away, she turned to me with venom. "You'll never prove I meant to kill you," she hissed. I met her eyes. "You just did." For a moment, the room went silent, like justice itself was listening. Then the cameras flashed again, and the woman who'd built her empire on intimidation disappeared behind a wall of federal agents and iron doors. The war was over. And for the first time in months, I could finally breathe. 7 days after my house turned to ash, Bryn Ashworth Sterling walked into my courtroom, in handcuffs. Gone was the manicured perfection, the yoga outfits, the smug confidence. What stood before me was a woman stripped of everything except arrogance. Her orange jumpsuit clashed beautifully with her spray tan, and for once she couldn't measure her way out of it. The courtroom buzzed like a hive. Every seat filled. Reporters packed the back rows, microphones ready. Former neighbors, victims really, stood along the walls. The Rodriguez family, the Johnsons. Walt, sitting front row, arms crossed like a sentry, and me? I wasn't presiding, I'd recused myself, of course. Another judge, Patricia Morrison, took the bench. But I sat beside the prosecutors, every document, every photo, every timestamp ready to speak for me. The charges filled the room. Attempted murder of a federal judge, first-degree arson, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, civil rights violations, and my personal favorite, RICO, each count stacked like bricks, building the prison that would hold her for life. Bryn's public defender stood, face pale, trying to argue for bail. He barely got 2 sentences in before the federal prosecutor, Amanda Stevens, rose with the confidence of a woman holding checkmate. "Your Honor," she said, "the defendant is a serial offender under multiple false identities, responsible for over $4 million in fraud and 15 destroyed communities. She attempted to murder a sitting federal judge by burning down her home, then filed an insurance claim before the fire started. We consider her not just a flight risk, but a domestic terrorist." Gasps rippled through the room. Even the reporters froze. Then Bryn did the one thing I'd been waiting for. She stood. "This is a witch hunt," she shouted, voice cracking. "Judge Blackwood used her position to destroy me. She's the real abuser of power," the gallery murmured. Flashbulbs exploded. I leaned back, calm as stone. Judge Morrison adjusted her glasses and said, "Mrs. Sterling, you stand accused of attempting to murder a federal judge, defrauding your community, and orchestrating organized crime across 4 states. The evidence is overwhelming. The only witchcraft here is the illusion you thought you could get away with this." The gavel struck once. Bail denied. Defendant remanded to federal custody. Applause erupted, not the polite kind, the cathartic kind. The kind that shakes walls and lifts the weight of 100 bullied neighbors. As marshals led Bryn away, she turned to me with venom. "You'll never prove I meant to kill you," she hissed. I met her eyes. "You just did." For a moment, the room went silent, like justice itself was listening. Then the cameras flashed again, and the woman who'd built her empire on intimidation disappeared behind a wall of federal agents and iron doors. The war was over. And for the first time in months, I could finally breathe. 7 days after my house turned to ash, Bryn Ashworth Sterling walked into my courtroom, in handcuffs. Gone was the manicured perfection, the yoga outfits, the smug confidence. What stood before me was a woman stripped of everything except arrogance. Her orange jumpsuit clashed beautifully with her spray tan, and for once she couldn't measure her way out of it. The courtroom buzzed like a hive. Every seat filled. Reporters packed the back rows, microphones ready. Former neighbors, victims really, stood along the walls. The Rodriguez family, the Johnsons. Walt, sitting front row, arms crossed like a sentry, and me? I wasn't presiding, I'd recused myself, of course. Another judge, Patricia Morrison, took the bench. But I sat beside the prosecutors, every document, every photo, every timestamp ready to speak for me. The charges filled the room. Attempted murder of a federal judge, first-degree arson, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, civil rights violations, and my personal favorite, RICO. Each count stacked like bricks, building the prison that would... 2 years later, I stood in my rebuilt kitchen, watching sunlight spill across new countertops where ash once lay. Outside, the memorial garden bloomed again. Harold's roses taller, redder, defiant against everything that tried to destroy them. Gavel purred on the windowsill, his scars hidden under soft fur, his eyes sharp as ever. Pinewood Estates was unrecognizable, in the best way. Walt had been unanimously elected HOA president, and transparency had become law. Every resident could now see where their dues went, every decision required community approval, and harassment was grounds for immediate removal. The neighborhood that had once been ruled by fear now thrived on fairness. Bryn Ashworth Sterling, or Bethany or Rebecca, or whatever name she'd stolen last, would never see sunlight without bars again. Life without parole. Her husband got 25 years. The restitution funds they forfeited rebuilt homes, gardens, and hope across 4 states. My story spread further than I'd imagined. Law schools studied the case. Legislators passed the Pinewood Protection Act, safeguarding neighborhoods from HOA corruption. Each time I spoke about justice, I remembered Harold's favorite line. Patience isn't passive, it's power waiting for the right moment. He was right. From the ashes of our home grew a community stronger than fear and louder than silence. So to anyone fighting their own HOA nightmare, document everything. Stand your ground and remember, bullies burn out, but justice doesn't. Now tell me, what would you have done if it was your home?